What's up, everybody? Back here today with another video. This one's on the Leibnizian cosmological argument for the existence of God. Again, notes here are going to be linked in the video description below, and let's get right into this. So what is the deal with this? What is this argument? What is it attempting to prove? So the basic idea here is going to be articulated in Edward Feser's book, 5 Proofs of the Existence of God, and Alexander Proust's article in the Blackwell Companion to Natural Theology. You can get those online. Now, the basic argument is going to be taking this principle called the principle of sufficient reason and applying it to various things and ending up concluding that the universe must have, or reality I should say, must have a necessary foundation. Some sort of necessary being must be at the bottom of reality. And this necessary being is what we call God. Okay, what exactly does all that mean? You still might be confused. Let's start to walk through this argument. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to lay out the premises, and along the way I'm going to discuss them, and hopefully by the end things will start to get a lot clearer for you all. So let's start. Premise 1, PSR, the principle of sufficient reason, is true. What is the PSR? The PSR is, as formulated by Reginald Garrigou-Lagrange, that it is the principle that everything that is must have a sufficient reason to be. So everything that is must have a sufficient reason to be. Okay, you can formulate it in different ways, but we're sticking with this formulation because it avoids some more technical problems. So why should I believe this? Well, I'll give you 2 answers. And again, I can make a video. In fact, I probably will make a video on the PSR. In fact, I have Alex Proust's book here, The Principle of Sufficient Reason. I've been really busy with grad school, so I haven't gotten around to reading much of it. But I think in the future, I'll end up making a video on PSR entirely. There's a lot going on there. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to give you 2 arguments for the PSR that I think are pretty powerful. And so the first argument is going to be based on our empirical observations, empirical considerations. So when we look around, I have this laptop, I have this stack of books, I have all these things. When we look around, we notice that things have a sufficient reason to be and a sufficient reason for the way that they are. Those are 2 distinct things there. So this laptop has a sufficient reason for its existence, namely that the workers created it. And it has a sufficient reason for the way that it is, namely that I put this keyboard cover on, I put the case on, and so on and so on. So things in reality, they have a sufficient reason to be and a sufficient reason. So a sufficient reason for their existence and a sufficient reason for the way that they are. Okay. So when we look around, we notice that everything has this. Everything in our experience has this. We don't notice things. We never observe things that have no sufficient reason for why they are or the fact that they are. It's interesting. Dwell on that for a minute. Just pause the video and dwell on that. Think about that. Think about your experience. Think about the things around you. I have the book. I have the desk. I have chairs. I have bookshelves. All these things, they don't just pop into existence. They have a sufficient reason both for their existence, namely that somebody created them, and for why they are here, namely that somebody brought them in here. I'm sure I could ask around and find out who exactly did that. In fact, I could probably look, there's a sticker from the manufacturer there. So things have sufficient reasons to be and sufficient reasons for why they are. So our empirical observations support the PSR. Now think about a world where PSR were to be false. If PSR were to be false, well then things wouldn't have sufficient reasons to be, and you would see things, all this stuff around me. It's possible that those things would simply exist with no sufficient reason, or they would just pop into existence, yet we never observe that, and that's the point. Our empirical observations give us prima facie evidence that PSR is true. Again, this is one argument. And I think that when you take this empirical argument and combine it with other arguments, you get a strong cumulative case for the PSR. So what's this other argument? The second argument is more philosophical in nature. And it's going to stem from Alexander Proust's And again, Proust is going to develop some stuff. Feser's actually going to take this argument that I'm about to give you and develop it even more in his book. But Alexander Proust at Baylor, Robert Koons at UT Austin, Feser, Edward Feser, and Michael Della Rocca are all going to give distinct arguments for the PSR. I'm just going to here briefly spell out Proust's argument. And then again, when I get around to making that video on PSR, I'll go through the whole thing. So what's this argument? So Proust is going to say that if we deny PSR, we're led to a radical skepticism about our perceptions. Okay, what does this mean? Well, if we deny PSR, and think about this, pause the video and think about how radical this is. If we deny PSR, then in principle, we may have events, we may have things, so events, objects, everything. We may have things that have no reason for their existence or the way that they are. Okay? So, our perceptions, so I'm perceiving my phone that I film on, I'm perceiving my laptop, I'm perceiving everything. Why am I doing that? Well, because the laptop's actually here in reality. I'm looking at it. It's sort of imposing upon my perceptions. When I look outside, there's a window, and I look outside and I see the sky, when I see other buildings. All these things, these are my perceptions. And there's a reason for those perceptions, namely that I have a functioning vision, and that these things actually are there in reality. So, if PSR is false, then it is possible, it's possible if PSR is false, it's possible that my perceptions are there for no reason whatsoever, or for a different reason than I suppose. It's possible that my perceptions are not the result, or they're not explained, they don't have their sufficient reason in reality or my visual apparatus, my eyes. Now, this is radical. I think it should be clear enough, so pause the video if you're confused. And I'll say this one more time. If PSR is false, we live in a world where there does not have to be a sufficient reason for things. And so we would live, if PSR were to be false, we would live in a world where my perception does not have to have its sufficient reason in reality, so in the objects I'm perceiving, or in my vision, in my cognitive faculties. So you have a possibility of this radical skepticism where our perceptual experiences are there for no reason at all. We can't even trust them at all. We can't trust them to track reality because they may not be doing so. And you can get really radical at this and really trace out its implications. I think you end up with something like a Cartesian skepticism about reality, where you end up with that nagging underlying possibility of there always being some sort of chance that what we perceive is not real, and it's all illusory. So this is quite interesting. And that's a lot to give up. So if you want to deny PSR, you have to accept that possibility. You have to accept the possibility that our perceptions do not have a sufficient reason they don't have a sufficient reason at all. So Proust is actually going to go on to develop this in conjunction with Koons, and he's going to develop this and say that this entails a few more things, like the denial of probability, which is really radical, because then if you deny PSR and that entails a denial of probability, then you can't even say that it's unlikely that we'd be in some sort of Cartesian skepticism. But I'll leave that for the other video. I just want you to focus on those two arguments I gave. And think about this. Think about if you were to deny PSR, then you would have to deny a wealth of empirical evidence, and you would have to deny, or you would have to accept the possibility of some sort of Cartesian, just really radical skepticism. So I think that's a fairly compelling twofold case for the acceptance of PSR. Again, there are lots of other arguments for it, lots of others. In fact, these two that I gave are not my favorites. I just think that they're quite beginner friendly. So with that in mind, let's move on and let's say, okay, PSR is true. I've given you two good reasons for it. Let's say that PSR is true. So from there, let's say, okay, well, things in the world are contingent. So what is contingency? So let's take a look at this book here. So contingency can be defined in a variety of ways, but here I'm using it to refer to, again, this is in the notes, contingency. So such things that are contingent depend on other things for their existence. So this book, it depends on the temperature being within a certain range for its existence. If the temperature in this room were 1,000 degrees, it would just burst into flames. This book depends upon gravity. Depends on the strong nuclear force. You physicists out there, you can go really into depth with this and go crazy with it. So this book is contingent, meaning that it depends for its existence upon other things. Contingency can also mean could be otherwise. So you can define it that way as well. So this book could be otherwise. It didn't have to be. It could be in a different location, or it could not be at all had Feser not existed. So, but generally speaking, let's use contingency to refer to things that depend on other things for their existence. Okay, necessary. What does that mean? Necessary things or thing is something that has its reason to be within its own nature. Such things cannot fail to exist and do not depend on anything for their existence. Such a thing would be completely self-sufficient, okay? Look at that in the notes. I'm going to read it again. A necessary thing cannot fail to exist, and it would not depend on anything for its existence. Such a thing would be completely self-sufficient, so it would have its own reason to be within its own nature. It simply would be. It cannot. A necessary thing cannot fail to exist. So, things in the world. Premise 1, PSR is true. Premise 2, things in the world are contingent. This book's contingent. Laptop's contingent. I'm contingent. You're contingent. Things in the world are contingent. The argument here is seeking to address the question, can everything be contingent? Or must we posit some sort of necessary thing? Must we find at the bottom of our investigation some sort of necessary thing? So, premise 3 here. We're confronted really with two options. Or I shouldn't say really, we're confronted with two options. Technically 3, but I'll explain. So, things, the existence of contingent things, according to PSR, the existence of contingent things must be explained. We need to find a sufficient reason for contingent things to exist at all. Okay, we need to find a sufficient reason. So we have 3 options: nothingness, or brute fact, really, another contingent thing, or a necessary thing. So this book has to be explained by either nothingness, it has to be explained by another contingent thing, or it has to be explained by a necessary thing. The PSR rules out nothingness because nothingness as an explanation is not an explanation at all. It's either a brute fact. We say that there is no explanation, it simply is, that's a brute fact. Or we say, well, nothingness caused it, which, I mean, you could argue, I don't really quite see yet, if at all, why that would differ from a brute fact. But the point is that the PSR demands an explanation. And at the very best, nothingness is a lack of an explanation, not an explanation at all. And at the very worst, it's a brute fact, which is also not an explanation. So PSR demands that we give an explanation for this book. And, well, we can give an explanation in terms of a contingent thing, or we can give an explanation in terms of a necessary thing. So let's take that second option, that necessary thing, and let's bracket that off to the side. Because if we say that this is explained in terms of a necessary thing, then we've reached the conclusion of the argument, which is God. So let's look at explaining this book in terms of a contingent thing and see where that leads us. So this book was made by Ignatius Press. That's maybe it was printed somewhere else. I don't really know the technical details behind the book, but somebody obviously wrote the book. So Feser wrote the book, he sent off the manuscript, they published it, and so on and so on. Okay, well, according to PSR, we need an explanation for Feser. Okay, well, his parents. Okay, according to PSR, his parents are contingent, meaning that they depend on other things. So we need an explanation for his parents. Okay, well, humanity perhaps. Let's say his parents existed and had Feser because they're human nature. Well, we need an explanation of human nature and of humanity. So let's say evolution. According to PSR, evolution, also a contingent thing, didn't have to occur, depends on other things, depends on there being a universe at all. So why exactly did evolution occur? So see how what we're doing here is we're pushing back the chain and we're saying, look, in our explanation of this, we have to posit other contingent things, and those other contingent things lead us to more contingent things. And so that's really premise 4. So let me phrase it more abstractly. If a contingent thing, i.e. the book, is explained by another contingent thing and so on, such a series of things, even if progressing to infinity, will not satisfy PSR. Let me spell out that last point because you might be confused. So remember, we posited this book, Feser created this book, sent it off, etc. Feser's parents created Feser. We'll say evolution created humanity, and then we'll say that inorganic molecules led to organic molecules, which led to Darwinian selection and evolution. But let's go back even further. What led to these inorganic molecules? Well, let's say the Big Bang. And posit anything you want here. Posit the multiverse, the Big Bang, the Big Crunch, whatever you want here. These things are also contingent because they depend on other things. And they didn't have to be that way. So the Big Bang, the Big Crunch, the multiverse, they are contingent. They are contingent things. They could have been otherwise. It's our second definition of contingency, meaning that they could have been a different model. So the Big Crunch, well, it could have been the Big Bang, or it could have been a multiverse. But also these things depend on other conditions. So the Big Bang, well, that's going to depend upon some sort of, I'm not really sure on the astrophysics here. So let's say the multiverse. Let's use that as an example. If you're going to posit the multiverse, well, the reason it's contingent is because I think everything within the multiverse is also contingent, and so you get this addition, and I don't see how that can formulate a necessary multiverse. And so it would seem that the multiverse is going to depend for its existence upon the things within it. So you can kind of wrestle with this, but even so, the multiverse does not have an explanation. The Big Bang, it does not provide us with an ultimate explanation. It does not satisfy PSR. And so if you want to accept my point about the construction of the multiverse with contingent things adding up to create more contingent things, you can. I don't think it quite matters, because primarily whatever you posit is going to be, it's not going to satisfy the PSR. If you posit for the ultimate explanation of this book a multiverse, or if you posit a Big Crunch, or if you posit a Big Bang, or any other of these models, what you get is you get a relocation of the PSR's question. And you go from asking what caused this book to what caused the multiverse at all. Why does it exist at all? And you also get the question, why does it have the content that it does? And so you can posit more and more things. So what we've done is we've looked at this book and we've reasoned back to an explanation, namely the Big Bang, the Big Crunch, the multiverse. And we've said, well, that doesn't satisfy PSR either. That just relocates the problem. Because we have to ask, well, why are those things at all? And why do they have the content that they do? And so somebody like Richard Dawkins, I don't want to mischaracterize him, but he might come along and say, well, look, maybe it's aliens or some sort of extraterrestrial intelligence that created our multiverse, or whatever astrophysicist cosmological model you want to posit. Or maybe somebody like Elon Musk might say, and this is just an example, but he might say, well, maybe it's a simulation. Okay, cool. What explains the simulation? Or what explains the extraterrestrial life? Why are they at all? Why do they exist at all? And why are they the way that they are? Why do they have the content that they do? So PSR, if we constantly posit these explanations, PSR, it seems like, does not give us it demands an explanation, but us positing more and more, it doesn't get us to one. What is then going to satisfy PSR? Well, it's a necessary thing, something that is in virtue of its own nature. Okay. That is the only thing that can satisfy PSR. And so if we continuously apply PSR, we're led to a necessary... Excuse me, my allergies have been acting up. If we continuously apply PSR, we are left with we have to posit a necessary thing. And that is the end of the argument. We are left with something at the very bottom of the universe, which is responsible for being itself. The very explanation of this book traces back to a necessary thing, something that is and has its sufficient reason in its own nature. That is the ultimate explanation, and it's the only thing that's going to satisfy the PSR. And that is what we label God. So for Elon Musk will posit some sort of supercomputer or some sort of simulation. Okay, well, what's the cause of the simulation? Well, another simulation. Okay, PSR demands that we give an explanation. We could go on to infinity with simulations that's not going to satisfy PSR. So if we accept PSR, we have to say, well, there has to be something outside of the simulation that created all of the simulations, that created being itself. Or that's kind of a tricky sentence. I probably shouldn't have said that. But that's responsible for why things are at all. That's a better way to phrase it. So that is the Leibnizian cosmological argument. And from that conclusion of a necessary foundation, a necessary thing, we can tease out more divine attributes. So Feser's going to do that here. And if you want, I can make a separate video on that because it'll get quite long. And I want to stick to, I don't want to go on to like a 40-minute video because nobody will really pay attention. And so if you want, I can make another video where I'm talking about the divine attributes and talking about how you get from a necessary foundation to other attributes such as omniscience, perfection, goodness, intellect, omnipotence. But that's the conclusion of the argument, is that ultimately if we accept PSR, we have to posit a necessary foundation as an explanation of why reality is and why it has the content that it does. And that's what we call God. So I'm going to link in the video description below the argument written out here in premise format and some of the background info. If you want the super technical, logically sound, logically valid, but also I think sound formulation, you can look in Feser's book here, also in Proust's article in the Blackwell Companion in Natural Theology. But I hope that this has given you a very good look. I think it's quite intuitive once you start to understand the PSR and start to observe the things around us. I think it's intuitive that you are led to an ultimate explanation. So just to recap, I posited the PSR and I defended it with two arguments. And then I said, if we want to explain this book, we're led to explaining Feser, and we continuously apply PSR to every step in our explanation. So we explain this book by referring to Feser. We explain Edward Feser by referring to his parents. We explain his parents by referring to humanity as a whole, as a species. And we refer to that going back to evolution. And we've explained evolution by going back to organic molecules coming from inorganic ones. And we explain that by going back to the universe as a whole. And then we can explain the universe as a whole by looking at positing a multiverse theory or a big bang or a big crunch. But those things do not satisfy the PSR because we still are left with the question of why they have the content that they do and why they are at all in the first place. So why exactly is it a big bang instead of a big crunch? Or why exactly is it a multiverse? And why exactly does that thing, that multiverse or big crunch or big bang, why does that exist at all to begin with? Why isn't it just nothingness? And to answer that question, we can posit even more crazy explanations like aliens or a supercomputer, but ultimately we still have to apply PSR to those steps. And PSR will not stop. We can't stop applying PSR until we find something that has its sufficient reason in its very self, in its very nature. And that is what we call God. Thank you for listening. I hope you learned a lot. And please like, comment, subscribe, share the video. I will be happy to interact with you in the comments. So with that, I hope you pick up these books, and I hope that this video has impacted you in some way. I know that it has for me. I really love this argument. I am a big fan of it. I think that it's successful. And again, in the future, I'll make another video defending PSR, maybe explaining a lot of the arguments. It'll be a longer video, but yeah, thanks.